The U.S. Treasury plays a vital role in the American economy, yet many people have misconceptions about what it actually does and how it operates. From managing the nation's finances to overseeing currency production, the Treasury's functions are extensive and crucial. However, its role is often confused with other governmental entities, leading to a series of common misunderstandings. In this video, we'll dive into the top 10 facts about the U.S. Treasury that most people get wrong. 1. The U.S. Treasury doesn't print all the money. One of the most common misconceptions is that the U.S. Treasury prints all the money in circulation. While the Treasury does oversee the production of U.S. currency, it is the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, BEP, within the Treasury Department that is responsible for printing paper money. The U.S. Mint, also under the Treasury, produces coins. However, the Federal Reserve, not the Treasury, is responsible for controlling the supply of money in the economy. 2. The Treasury doesn't set the nation's interest rates. The U.S. Treasury is responsible for managing federal finances, including debt issuance, but it doesn't directly control the nation's interest rates. That responsibility lies with the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve uses tools like the federal funds rate to influence borrowing costs, money supply, and inflation. The Treasury's role is more about managing government debt through the issuance of bonds and securities. 3. Treasury bonds aren't issued to raise taxes. Many people believe the U.S. Treasury issues bonds to raise money for taxes, but that's not entirely accurate. The Treasury issues bonds to fund the government's operations when tax revenues fall short. These bonds are a way for the government to borrow money from investors to finance spending, not a direct mechanism for raising tax revenue. Tax collection, on the other hand, is handled by the Internal Revenue Service, IRS. 4. The U.S. Treasury doesn't have control over federal spending. The U.S. Treasury manages the funds allocated to federal programs, but it does not have the authority to determine how much money is spent. This responsibility lies with Congress. Through the annual budget process, Congress allocates funds to various federal agencies and programs. The Treasury's role is to execute and manage the flow of those funds, ensuring payments are made efficiently. 5. The Treasury doesn't print money to solve economic problems. Some people believe that in times of financial crisis, the U.S. Treasury can simply print more money to solve the issue. However, the Treasury's role is not to print money indiscriminately. Money supply decisions are made by the Federal Reserve, which carefully manages the money supply to avoid inflation. The Treasury can create debt through bonds and manage fiscal policy, but it cannot directly print money to address economic problems. 6. The U.S. Treasury doesn't control Social Security payments. While the U.S. Treasury plays a role in managing federal finances, it is not directly responsible for distributing Social Security payments. These payments are managed by the Social Security Administration, SSA. The Treasury does, however, fund these payments through the Social Security Trust Fund, which is built from payroll taxes paid by workers. 7. Treasury Secretary doesn't set tax policy. Although the Secretary of the Treasury is a key member of the President's economic team, they do not have the power to set tax policy. Tax laws are created by Congress and must be signed into law by the President. The Treasury Secretary's job is to enforce tax policies, collect federal revenue, and manage government spending, rather than creating or setting tax rates. 8. The U.S. Treasury doesn't own the Federal Reserve. Another common misconception is that the U.S. Treasury owns the Federal Reserve. While both entities play crucial roles in the U.S. economy, they are separate. The Federal Reserve is an independent central bank, and although the Treasury works closely with the Fed, the two are distinct institutions with different functions. The Treasury handles government spending and fiscal policy, while the Federal Reserve focuses on monetary policy and managing the money supply. 9. The Treasury doesn't have unlimited money. Even though the U.S. government has the ability to borrow funds through Treasury bonds, it does not have unlimited access to money. The national debt and the need to repay bondholders place limits on how much the Treasury can borrow. The Treasury's ability to borrow is ultimately capped by the debt ceiling, which is a limit set by Congress on how much the government can borrow before it must raise the ceiling or make changes to spending. 10. The Treasury isn't responsible for IRS audits. While the U.S. Treasury oversees the Internal Revenue Service, IRS, The responsibility for conducting audits and enforcing tax laws lies with the IRS, not the Treasury itself. The IRS is the agency responsible for ensuring that taxpayers comply with federal tax laws, and it is the one that conducts audits, collects taxes, and enforces penalties for violations. The U.S. Treasury plays a critical role in managing the nation's finances, but there are several misconceptions about what it does and how it functions. From its involvement in printing money to its relationship with the Federal Reserve, understanding these key differences is essential for a clearer picture of how U.S. economic policies are implemented. By recognizing the boundaries of the Treasury's role, people can better understand the larger framework of U.S. fiscal and monetary policies and their impact on everyday life.